I rejected this sweet guy several times. Then, months later, he started dating another girl. Today I saw them together on the train, and when I got home I started crying. He belonged to me. I have always been acutely aware of my own worth in a world that often settles for the mediocre. I am the kind of woman who stops traffic. The one men stare at with a mixture of reverence and fear because they know I am out of their league. It is a lonely position at the top, but I have always embraced it as my natural birthright. Most men do not even have the courage to approach me, sensing the invisible barrier I've built with my own high standards. I've spent years cultivating this aura of being the ultimate prize, the one who decides who is worthy of a glance and who is invisible. To me, attention is not just a social currency, it is a form of tribute that I expect as a matter of course. For months, Tiago was the most dedicated of these subjects, practically acting as my shadow. He was sweet, persistent, and so clearly obsessed with me that it became a comforting constant in my daily life. There was a certain purity in his devotion that I found useful, like a soft light that followed me around to ensure I was always seen in my best angle. He wasn't like the others who gave up after a single cold look. He seemed to believe that if he just stayed close enough, I would eventually grant him a seat at my table. I let him stay in that orbit because it felt right to have someone so wholesome constantly reminding me of my desirability. He was mine. In a way, a permanent fixture of my ego's architecture. He asked me out 3 separate times, and each time I gave him the same cold, calculated smile before saying no. I didn't reject him because I found him repulsive or because there was something wrong with him. On the contrary, I did it because I absolutely loved the rush of power it gave me to see his spirit sag and then watch him regroup. There is no drug in the world quite like the feeling of being the person who can make or break someone's week with a single word. Every time he walked away, disappointed, I knew he would be back, even more anxious for my approval than before. I was training him to understand that my time was a luxury he hadn't earned yet, keeping him on a leash of maybe that I held with firm, manicured fingers. To memorialize my status as the unreachable queen of his world, I kept all his old messages saved like trophies in my phone. I never responded to them, of course, because replying would have broken the spell of my silence. I would scroll through his long, heartfelt paragraphs about how much he admired my intelligence and grace whenever I needed a quick boost of confidence. Those messages were physical proof that I owned a piece of his soul, a digital deed to his heart that I could review whenever I pleased. They weren't just texts. They were certificates of my superiority that I tucked away in my digital vault. I truly believed that as long as I had those messages, I had him, and he would be waiting in the wings forever. Today started like any other day, with me feeling elegant and entirely superior to the masses surrounding me on my commute. I was sitting on the train, gazing at my own reflection in the dark window and thinking about how perfectly my coat draped over my shoulders. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from knowing you are the most interesting person in a room full of strangers. I was lost in my own thoughts, basking in the quiet glow of my own self-satisfaction when the atmosphere of the car suddenly shifted. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the space, leaving me gasping for the attention I usually take for granted. My eyes drifted away from my reflection and landed on a couple sitting just 3 rows ahead of me. My heart didn't just drop. It felt like it was being physically ripped out of my chest by a pair of dirty hands. There was Tiago, but he wasn't the lonely, pining figure I had archived in my mind. He was sitting with a girl named Camila, someone I recognized from the periphery of my social circle through a mutual acquaintance's post. I hadn't thought about her in months, but seeing her there felt like seeing a thief standing in the middle of my living room holding my jewelry. She was occupying the space that I had left vacant, but that didn't mean it was hers to take. The audacity of her sitting there breathing the same air as the man who was supposed to be mourning. My latest rejection was beyond insulting. The worst part wasn't even that he was with someone else. It was the way he was behaving. He wasn't scanning the train car for me like he used to do every single time we crossed paths. His entire world had shrunk down to the size of the seat they were sharing, and he didn't even notice I was there. He was leaned into her space, his body language completely open and vulnerable in a way he had once only been with me. It felt like a betrayal of the highest order, as if he had taken a script written for me and was performing it for a cheap understudy. I felt a surge of possessive rage that made my vision blur at the edges. I watched him whisper something into her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh with a genuine, annoying brightness. Then he looked at her with that exact same expression of pure, unadulterated devotion that he used to reserve exclusively for me. That look was mine. I had cultivated it. I had nurtured it through my calculated distance, and it was my property. Seeing him give it to a girl like Camila felt like a physical robbery, a heist of my emotional assets. She is a total usurper, a nobody who walked into a kingdom I spent months building with my strategic rejections. She didn't earn that look, she just happened to be there when he decided to be weak and give up on me. When I finally got home, I didn't even take off my coat before I collapsed onto my bed and started sobbing. These weren't tears of love or heartbreak in the traditional sense. They were tears of pure, indignant fury. I felt like a queen who had returned from a long journey only to find a peasant sitting on her throne and wearing her crown. How could he just hand over the keys to his heart to someone so common after everything I put him through to make him value me? It was a slap in the face to my entire philosophy of high-value dating and the power dynamics I worked so hard to maintain. I felt completely destabilized, as if the ground beneath my feet had turned into water. I spent the evening staring at those old messages, but they didn't feel like trophies anymore. They felt like mocking reminders of a power I had lost. I kept thinking about the way his hand rested on her knee, a gesture of familiarity that he had never dared to attempt with me. It's not that I wanted him back in my life as a boyfriend. I just wanted him back in his place as my admirer. The idea that he could find happiness with someone else suggests that I am replaceable, which is a lie I refuse to accept. He belonged to me, and Camila has stolen something that she will never truly understand or deserve. I am the architect of his desire and she is just a squatter in the house I built. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, so let me get this straight. You rejected him 3 times, treated him like a pet for your ego, and now you're mad he found someone who actually likes him? You didn't lose a kingdom, you threw the trash out and someone else saw the value in the trash you were too stuck up to appreciate. Ops reply, you clearly don't understand how high-value dynamics work. True loyalty doesn't just evaporate because of a few no's. A man who truly recognizes a woman's worth waits for her. He doesn't just settle for the first person who says yes because his ego is bruised. Anonymous user 2 says you're literally calling him your property, while bragging about keeping his unread messages as trophies. You're like a child who hides a toy in the back of the closet and then screams when another kid finds it and actually plays with it. OP's reply, it's not about playing with toys, it's about the fact that I invested time in his development as a suitor. I set the standard for him and now some random girl is reaping the benefits of the discipline I instilled. It's ungrateful on his part and pathetic on hers. Update 1. It has been 3 days since that traumatic encounter on the train and I haven't been able to find a moment of peace. My mind is a constant loop of that scene, analyzing every micro-expression and every disgusting display of affection they shared. I finally caved and decided to do a deep dive into his Instagram, something I was always too busy and too important to do when he was actually chasing me. It felt beneath me to be scrolling through his digital life, but I needed to understand the extent of this delusion he's living in. I was hoping to see a feed full of regret, or perhaps just silence, but what I found was a curated museum of my own humiliation. He has posted multiple photos with her Camila and they all look nauseatingly domestic and happy. In one, they're at a farmer's market, and in another they're hiking looking like a couple from a mediocre commercial for allergy medication. The sting comes from the fact that he never posted a single thing about me, mainly because I never gave him the opportunity. But seeing her face plastered all over his profile feels like a violation. It's as if he's trying to overwrite the memory of me with this bland, accessible version of a woman. It feels like a direct assault on my privacy, even though it's his account, because he's using the space that should be reserved for my mystery. To make matters even more insulting, I noticed that several of my so-called friends have been liking and commenting on these photos. These are women who have sat at brunch with me and listened to me talk about how I was keeping Tiago in check for his own good. Now, they're over there dropping heart emojis and telling them how cute they look together, which is a total betrayal of our social contract. They are validating his decision to move on, essentially telling him that it's okay to replace a premium experience with a budget one. It makes me realize that I'm surrounded by people who don't respect the hierarchy of status and beauty that I represent. The more I looked at the photos, the more I felt a desperate need to restore the natural order of things. I couldn't just let him believe that he had successfully moved on and that his life was better without my influence. I needed to remind him of the leash he used to wear so proudly, to see if the collar still fit after 3 months of neglect. I went back to our message thread, the one filled with his desperate pleas and my calculated silence, and looked at the very last thing he sent me. It was a simple invitation to get coffee, a final attempt at a connection before he clearly gave up and settled for Camila. With a shaking hand, I typed out a response, acting as if only a few hours had passed instead of 90 days. I wrote, "I've been thinking about that cafe you mentioned recently. Are you still interested in going sometime?" I didn't add any emojis or extra fluff. I wanted to maintain my signature aura of detached interest that used to drive him wild. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I hit send, convinced that the mere sight of my name on his screen would cause his current relationship to crumble. A man like Tiago doesn't just forget a woman of my caliber. He's likely been staring at his phone for 3 months, praying for this exact moment. I spent the next several hours checking my phone every 2 minutes, waiting for the inevitable wave of apologies and renewed devotion. I imagined him sitting next to Camila, seeing my notification and immediately feeling a rush of regret for ever trying to replace me. In my mind, he would realize that she was just a placeholder, a temporary distraction to numb the pain of my absence. I was doing him a favor by reaching out, giving him a path back to the high-quality life he actually wants. It felt like a benevolent act, a queen granting a pardon to a wayward subject who had lost his way in a commoner's forest. However, as the hours turned into a full day of silence, my confidence began to fray at the edges, replaced by a cold, sharp bitterness. I started to wonder if my friends were right to be suspicious, but I quickly dismissed that as the kind of weak thinking that plagues people who aren't me. Clearly, he was just overwhelmed by the suddenness of my message and didn't know how to handle the emotional weight of it. He's probably terrified of messing up this one chance I've finally given him after all this time. I've decided to give him grace, but the silence is starting to feel less like shock and more like a lack of manners. I refuse to believe that he has actually found something better with a girl who looks like she buys her clothes from a supermarket. People like Camila are safe. They are the easy path for men who are too intimidated by real intensity and fire. My intensity is what made him obsessed in the first place, even if it scared him, and that kind of connection doesn't just die. He's likely just playing a game of his own now, trying to make me wait as a form of petty revenge for my previous rejections. It's a predictable tactic, but one that I can easily overcome with a bit more strategic visibility in his life. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you waited 90 days to answer a coffee invite. Do you think his life is a paused video game and he's just been sitting there holding the controller? He's moved on because he's a human being, not a character in your weird power fantasy. Ops reply, men like Tiago don't just move on from women like me. He's in a state of shock right now because he never expected me to actually lower my guard. He isn't moving on. He's just treading water until I decide to pull him back to shore. Anonymous user 2 says your friends are liking his photos because Camila probably treats people like they're actual humans instead of subjects. Maybe they're tired of hearing about your high-value nonsense and are happy to see a guy escape your orbit. Ops reply, my friends are intimidated by my standards because they remind them of their own mediocrity. They've chosen the easy path by supporting this safe couple because they can't handle the heat of a real power dynamic. It's classic jealousy dressed up as support. Update 2. It has been a full week since I sent that message, and the silence from Tiago's end was beginning to feel like a physical weight on my chest. He finally replied after 4 agonizing days, but the message was so brief and sanitized that it felt like he had hired a lawyer to write it for him. He said, "Oh, hi Beatrice. Actually, I'm in a serious relationship now. I hope you're doing well." There wasn't a single emoji, no exclamation points, and certainly no hint of the desperation that used to define his every interaction with me. It was the kind of polite, distant response you give to a distant relative or a former coworker you barely remember. I knew immediately that this was a test, a calculated attempt to make me feel the sting of rejection that he had endured for so long. He's clearly trying to use Camila as a shield to protect his ego, hoping that by acting taken he can finally gain the upper hand in our dynamic. It was almost cute in its transparency. He wants me to chase him now, to prove that I actually care so he can feel validated. He thinks he's being clever by playing the loyal boyfriend card, but I know him better than he knows himself. He's a man driven by his admiration for me, and that kind of deep-seated obsession doesn't just vanish because he's dating a girl who probably thinks brunch is a personality trait. Since he wanted to play games with text, I decided it was time to remind him of what he was missing in the physical world. I know his routine like the back of my hand. He goes to the same gym every Tuesday at 6 p.m. like clockwork. I spent 2 full hours on my hair and makeup, making sure I looked like the unattainable dream he first fell in love with. I chose my outfits carefully, settling on the specific black leggings he once told me looked incredible on me during one of his pathetic attempts to flirt. I wasn't going there to talk to him, of course. I was going there to be an undeniable presence that he couldn't ignore. When I walked into the gym, I felt like all eyes were on me, which is exactly how it should be. I made sure to secure a spot near the free weights, right in his direct line of sight while he was doing his usual circuit. I didn't look at him once, maintaining my focused gym girl persona, but I could feel his energy shifting the moment he realized I was there. I made sure my form was perfect, every movement calculated to remind him of the high-quality woman he was trying to replace with a generic version. I was a living, breathing reminder of the prize he had supposedly moved on from, and I knew it was eating him alive. I stayed within his peripheral vision for 45 minutes, never once breaking my mask of indifference. I could see him struggling to maintain his focus, his eyes darting toward me between sets before he would quickly look away and stare at his phone. He was clearly texting Camila, probably looking for a hit of her low-level validation to distract him from the goddess standing 10 feet away. It was a pathetic display of supercompensation. He was trying so hard to act like he didn't care that it only proved how much he actually did. A man who is truly over someone doesn't have to work that hard to ignore them in a public space. As I finished my workout and headed to the locker room, I felt a surge of triumph. I had successfully disrupted his peace and reminded him that I am a constant, looming reality that his little relationship can't account for. He can tell himself whatever he wants about being in a serious relationship, but his body language told a different story. He looked tense, distracted, and utterly haunted by my presence. I left the gym feeling more powerful than I had in weeks, convinced that my accidental appearance had planted a seed of doubt that would eventually bloom into his return. I spent the rest of the evening imagining the conversation he would have with Camila later that night. He would be distant and moody, and when she asked him what was wrong, he would have to lie about seeing me. The guilt of still wanting me would start to erode whatever foundation they've built, because no man can truly be happy with a silver medal when he knows the gold is still within reach. I am the gold, and he knows it. He's just currently terrified of the effort it takes to win me. I've decided to be patient, allowing the gravity of my existence to pull him back into my orbit where he belongs. The idea that he was actually being faithful is a joke that only someone as delusional as an internet commenter would believe. Fidelity is easy when you aren't being tempted by the woman of your dreams. It's a virtue born of a lack of options. Now that I've put myself back on the table, his faithfulness is being tested for the first time, and I know exactly how that story ends. He's in a panic, and that panic is the first step toward him realizing that Camila is just a temporary port in a storm I created. I'm the storm, and I'm not finished with him yet. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you spent 2 hours on makeup to go to the gym just to be visible to a guy who clearly told you he's in a relationship. This isn't a power move. It's a main character syndrome breakdown. He's not haunted by you. He's probably just trying to finish his sets without you making it weird. Ops reply, I was simply working out in a public space that I have every right to be in. If my presence is weird for him, it's because he hasn't dealt with his lingering feelings for me. I don't control his reactions. I only control my own excellence. Anonymous user 2 says shout out to Tiago for actually staying focused and not falling for this desperate leggings trap. He sent a polite text and moved on with his workout. He's showing real character while you're showing everyone why he's better off without you. Ops reply, you call it character. I call it a desperate attempt to stay in denial. He's super compensating because he knows that one word from me would shatter his little serious relationship into a million pieces. He's terrified of his own desire. Update 3. It has been 2 weeks since my gym appearance, and things have spiraled in a direction that I can only describe as a coordinated effort to humiliate me. After that day at the gym, Tiago's silence became absolute, and he even blocked my number, which is the ultimate sign of a man who is terrified of his own feelings. He didn't even have the courage to tell me he was blocking me. He just vanished, thinking that out of sight means out of mind. I spent days fuming at the sheer cowardice of it all, realizing that his relationship with Camila had turned him into a shadow of the man he used to be. I couldn't let it end on his terms, not when he was clearly being manipulated into acting against his true nature. I decided that the only way to break through this wall of denial was a direct, face-to-face confrontation where he couldn't hide behind a screen or a gym machine. I waited for him in the parking lot after his Tuesday session, sitting in my car and watching the entrance like a hawk. When he finally walked out, looking tired and checking his phone with a stupid smile on his face, I stepped out and blocked his path to his car. He looked startled, his eyes widening in a way that I interpreted as the shock of finally having to face the truth. I didn't scream or make a scene. I kept my voice calm and authoritative, the way a queen addresses a peasant who has forgotten his place. I told him straight to his face that he didn't need to put on this ridiculous theater with a rebound girl just to get my attention. I explained that I understood why he was doing it. He wanted to hurt me the way I hurt him, but that the point had been made and the game was over. I even went as far as to call Camila exactly what she's: a placeholder, a temporary distraction that he's using to fill the void I left. I told him I was finally ready to give him a real chance, to let him into my world on a permanent basis because I was tired of the distance. I felt like I was being incredibly generous, offering him the very thing he had spent months begging for. To prove my point, I took out my phone and started scrolling through his old messages, the ones filled with his obsessive poetry and declarations of love. I held the screen up to his face, forcing him to look at the evidence of his own devotion so he couldn't lie to himself anymore. "Remember this?" I asked, my voice dripping with a mixture of pity and promise. "This is how you really feel, Tiago. You don't feel this way about her. You're just comfortable." I expected him to break down, to apologize, to tell me that seeing those words reminded him of his true purpose, but his reaction was something I never could have prepared for. He didn't look at the screen with nostalgia. He looked at it with a mixture of pity and genuine exhaustion, as if I were a difficult child. He was tired of babysitting. Without saying a word to me, he pulled out his own phone and hit a contact on speakerphone before I could even process what was happening. "I am he said, his voice sounding warmer and more genuine than I'd ever heard it. "That girl I told you about, the one who used to ignore me? She's here in the parking lot right now, acting really strange and showing me old texts. Can you come pick me up? I really don't want to deal with this." The sound of Camila's voice coming through the speaker was like a physical blow to my face. She laughed a light, dismissive sound and said, "Oh, her again? I'm already on my way, babe. Just stay by the entrance where it's lit." I stood there, frozen, as the realization washed over me like cold, dirty water. He had told her about me. He hadn't told her about the unattainable queen or the mysterious woman of his dreams. He had told her about a girl who ignored him and was now acting strange. He had turned my rejections, the very things that gave me my power, into a funny story. They used to bond. In that single moment, my entire identity as the unreachable prize was dismantled and repurposed as a cautionary tale for his new girlfriend. I wasn't a goddess to him anymore. I was a situation he had to deal with. A pathetic anecdote that made him and Camila feel closer. All the mystery I had worked so hard to maintain, all the aura of superiority I had built, had been stripped away and turned into a joke. He was using me to make her feel secure, effectively sacrificing my reputation on the altar of their mediocre happiness. I felt smaller than I have ever felt in my entire life, standing there in a parking lot with my own trophies being used as evidence of my insanity. I didn't wait for her to arrive. I couldn't bear the thought of her seeing me in that state, looking at me with the same pity he had just displayed. I got into my car and drove away, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I felt like a martyr who had opened her heart only to have it trampled on by someone who wasn't even worthy of holding it. It is incredibly cruel to humiliate someone who is finally being honest about their feelings, and I will never forgive him for using my own history against me. He didn't just move on. He committed a form of emotional character assassination that has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my own power. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "That girl I told you about, acting in a weird way. Oh my god, that's the most brutal way to be described. You thought you were a legend, and it turns out you're just a funny story. He tells his actual girlfriend to make her laugh. Ops reply, it is incredibly toxic and cruel to humiliate someone who is opening their heart and being vulnerable. I wasn't acting weird. I was being honest, and he used that honesty to score points with a girl who is a total downgrade. It shows a complete lack of class. Anonymous user 2 says calling the new girlfriend a placeholder while holding up 3-month-old texts like they're holy relics. Tiago definitely upgraded in the mental health department. You didn't sacrifice your reputation. You set it on fire yourself in that parking lot. Ops reply, Camila is just a common girl who offers him a boring, safe life. People like Tiago settle for the easy option when they realize they aren't strong enough to handle the fire of a woman like me. She's not an upgrade, she's a retreat. Update 4. It has been 3 months since that final humiliating night in the parking lot, and my life has undergone a quiet, miserable transformation. I had to change gyms because I couldn't stand the thought of running into Tiago or, heaven forbid, seeing Camila there with him, looking triumphant. I also stopped taking my usual train line, adding 20 minutes to my commute every morning just to avoid the possibility of seeing them together again. My social circle has become disturbingly quiet apparently. Word got around that I harassed him in the parking lot, and suddenly the invitations to brunch and parties have dried up. My friends, the ones who used to admire my standards, have seemingly decided that I am a liability to their own wholesome social standings. I spend an unhealthy amount of time looking at those old messages on my phone, but they don't look like trophies anymore. They look like a map of all the mistakes I made. Evidence of a time when I held all the cards and decided to burn the deck instead of playing the hand. I realize now that I wasn't building a kingdom. I was building a cage out of my own arrogance, and I'm the only one left inside of it. The power I thought I had was entirely dependent on Tiago's willingness to look at me with longing. And now that he's blind to my existence, that power has simply evaporated. Without his gaze to validate my status as the prize, I feel like I've stopped existing in the way I once did. I still see photos of them occasionally when they pop up on a mutual acquaintance's feed, and it's the most painful thing I've ever had to endure. They look so incredibly stabilized, so intimidatingly happy, and so profoundly boring in their domesticity. They go to the park, they have dinner with friends, and they look at each other with a quiet, mutual respect that I never allowed Tiago to feel for me. It's a kind of happiness that I always looked down upon as common, but now, from the outside looking in, it looks like a fortress. I'm not allowed to enter. I'm still in El Carnaval, I suppose, but the irony is that no one is even trying to reach me anymore. I've kept my crown, and I still walk with the same posture and wear the same expensive clothes, but I'm sitting in an empty room of my own making. I realized too late that a prize that is never won eventually stops being a prize and just becomes a forgotten relic. My mystery didn't make me legendary. It just made me an anecdote. A crazy girl story that a happy couple uses to feel better about their own relationship. I am the villain in his story now, the one he escaped from, and there is no way for me to rewrite that ending. I'm still here, waiting for the world to recognize my value again, but the silence is the only thing that answers me.